Very drink. This is going to be a very informative meeting. And refreshments are always beneficial. So we are going to, before I call the meeting to order, I do want to introduce your board of directors. I'm Gail Morton. I am currently the president of the Marine Coast Water District Board. To my right is Director Jan Schreiner, vice president of the Marine Coast Water District Board. To my left is Herbert Cortez, director, Brad Imamura, and Tom Moore, also directors. So we are elected by you in this community to serve and represent your interests. And so we're going to call this meeting to order and fulfill that function. So with the call to order, I need a call. Director Cortez.
Here.
Director Imamura.
Present.
Director Moore.
Here.
Vice President Schreiner. Here. President Morton. Here. And with that, we are going to have a public forum review of the 2024 water, wastewater, and recycled water rate study. And I think that Martin is going to take over. He is our public relations individual who will be handling the communications of the public with us tonight. And I think you might need to.
I do need that. Yes, thank you, Director.
It's still on.
Okay.
You can figure it out.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. As Director Morton just said, and I'm going to give a brief introduction for all of you, and be then handing it to the financial consultant who's going to explain about the actual rates. Could you move the slides forward, Tia?
Martin Miller wrote.
Yeah.
Can you read that?
Yes, I can.
I'm supposed to.
So reading this statement here, the public may comment on any item listed on the agenda at the time they are considered by the board. Disruptive behavior may result in removal of the individual's. Thank you. We'll get the slide going. And then Tio, we can go to the agenda slide. You go. All right, thank you. Let's start with a brief introduction to what we'll be doing here tonight. There's a whole list of items there, 7 that we'll be covering. But I just want to say briefly, what we'll be doing is really very straightforward. We're going to have a brief introduction about the district, some background, and that's for anybody who maybe doesn't know about the district or very little. Just to give you some insight into what we're doing and some context for these rates. We're then going to have to Mark Hildebrand. He's the independent financial consultant for district staff to develop the rates. And he's going to give us some of the work he did to evaluate the finances, develop the rates. They'll be sharing the rates and some sample bills so they can understand the impact of the rates. We'll then take a very brief moment to just explain a couple of extra steps that it takes to implement the rates over the coming couple of months. And then we'll have time for anybody to ask questions, make comments, provide whatever you'd like to share with us. So we can go forward, Tio. During the presentation, I'd like to ask that if you do have questions that you save them, unless they're clarifying. And a clarifying question is simply, if we're moving along too fast or we pass over something and it's not clear to you, we definitely want you to be following along well and understand what we're talking about. So pause us if you're in the room, just raise your hand, we'll recognize you and hear your question. If you're online, we can switch to the next slide. If you're on, find a little, see that arrow up top on your Zoom dial, and then click the raise hand, or maybe the raise hand will just be visible. So we'll recognize you, and you can ask your question. And if you're on the phone, you can toggle star nine. That'll cause you to raise your hand and then do star nine again. It'll lower your hand. And similarly, star six will mute and then unmute you as you go back and forth with star six. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have, as I said, plenty of time for more developed questions, comments, input, etc. Let's move forward. We want to take a few minutes to provide a little background. And as I said, the purpose is partly for some of you who may know very much about the district, provide some context. But I think maybe more importantly, we're talking about rates here tonight, but we want to reinforce the idea that the rates really only serve one purpose, which is to serve you, to provide quality water and wastewater service for all the customers of the district. The district's a public agency, will very at the moment doesn't make a profit. So all the money, the purpose of it is to make sure that the district can provide great service to you. And so we want to just about it, we can roll forward. Here's a map of the districts, maybe a little hard to see, but in simple terms, the district can be said to cover Marina and the word community. In total, it serves 4 cities. Let me see if I get it in Monterey. Are added to that. There's some state and federal government jurisdictions. There's 2 universities and 40,000 people that the district is serving. So that's a quick service area. You can see it there on the coast. Tia, we can go forward. There's 47 professionals who make all this happen for you. This obviously isn't all 47, but they represent a variety of professions. There's people who are experts at, maintaining the system, or there's engineers, there's finance people, customer service people, and a range of other folks to provide the service that you all need. We go forward. The district has excellent water supplies. They like to talk about a portfolio of supplies, the way you talk about the financial portfolio, having a variety of supplies, which makes it more robust and more reliable. The main source is groundwater that's pumped out of the ground through wells. The district has a small desalination plant and the permits to run it. It's currently mothballed, but there's a possibility of opening that in the future. The district also is partners in providing recycled water, which is provided to golf courses in the seaside. And also it's something called aquifer storage and recovery, which is another use of recycled water waste taken from the treatment plant through pipeline by the district to a well field where these aquifer storage and recovery wells can, instead of just pumping out water, they can put the recycled water into the groundwater basin, forming sort of like an extra supply of underground water that can be stored for future use. The district has a variety of sub-services and different customer services, and one is the conservation program. There's a conservation person in the back with some of that information, but the district has a very extensive conservation program, a wide range of rebates, incentives to help pay for different conservation improvements, information, tips, classes. They even have people who can come here with various aspects of water conservation. We'd encourage everybody to look into that. You can check it out on the website, on the district website, or call and learn more, take advantage of those programs. There's, of course, other people who are focused on water quality and things. The state has extremely strict regulations about maintaining water quality. There's just a picture of one of the team taking a water quality sample. There's extensive testing at independent labs. There's all sorts of steps, and there's a person in the back who can, if you're interested in going back there, learn a little bit more about the water quality program. But that's obviously a very high priority for the district, ensuring quality water. There's many people involved in maintenance, upgrades, replacement. They have advanced tools, 24/7 monitoring of the system. The staff, of course, is sometimes called to work at any time of the day or night to make sure the system always works. And I'm just throwing out a guess here on my own. I haven't asked anyone about this, but I'm going to bet most people cannot think of a time when the water service or the sewer service didn't work for them. Basically works 24/7 all the time. And that's because of the excellent maintenance and care of the system over time. Moving. just giving you an idea of some of the extent of the system. A lot of it's underground or tucked away places. You're not going to see it or notice it, but there are 20 sewer and 6 water pump stations. You can see a little bit in the background there. These are very large pumps that move the water, the sewage up and down over hills and different elevations to get it where it needs to go. There's of course backup generators to make sure those can operate when power is out. They're maintained and tested. There's over nearly 150 miles of sewer pipelines, over 200 of water pipelines, 6 large wells that pump the water out that's delivered to you. That's just some of the systems that they have. We can move to the next one, Tio. These are a picture of a couple of storage tanks, and maybe you can see there's a person in the foreground there. You can get a sense of the scale of these tanks. They're pretty big, and these provide benefits for the district and for all of you customers. They can pump water into them when the electricity rates are lower, like at night or different times. And then the water's just sitting there and can flow by gravity at times when electricity is high, saving money. When there's a fire, there's a lot of water just sitting there ready to flow by gravity. If there's any other kind of emergency, the water's sitting there. If part of the system, there's storage, giving the staff time to repair it and not run out of water. So these kind of tanks provide a lot of benefits, and I don't know the number, but there's a number of them. This is a picture of the wastewater treatment plant. The district is 27% owned, nearly a third. It's quite a major facility. This is where your sewage is treated, and it's also where there's additional treatment facilities to create recycled water. And so that's an important facility that serves all the customers in the district. These pictures of these trucks, it's the same truck maybe, or the same type of truck. These are sort of Swiss Army knife kind of vehicles for sewer maintenance. They can do a wide variety of things. They basically have like a giant vacuum pump on the back. They can pump out, manholes or trenches or things that have mud in them without digging and damaging things. They can pump out things that are obstructing the sewer system that get caught in there. They have jet cleaning nozzles that can clean out the system. They have cutters, I believe, to cut roots. And so this is just an example of the kind of equipment you may not be aware of that the district uses and that is paid for by your rates. And that brings our little introduction to a conclusion. I'll hand it over to Mark.
Martin. My name is Mark Hildebrand. I am a rate consultant to water and sewer utilities. My job is to work with districts such as Marina Coast Water District to look at their finances, understand the amount of revenue that they're currently collecting, and look down the road at the next 5 or 10 years and develop a plan for the rates that they'll need to collect from their ratepayers in order to be able to provide high quality service as they have and to be financially stable. Next slide. So Mark just went over a number of really strong points about the district's operations and the services it provides to the community. And you really receive top-notch quality service here from Marina Coast. But just like most water utilities across the country, it's facing challenges. And a lot of it is rooted in just infrastructure. And I'm sure that you've read the news and that you heard about aging infrastructure being a problem across the nation, aging bridges, aging roads, aging tunnels. A lot of this country was built in the 1960s, 1970s, and a lot of that infrastructure that was built is coming to a point where it needs to be replaced. And that is the case for both Orange and Marina, which were built a number of decades ago. And a lot of that infrastructure needs to be rehabilitated or replaced. And really what we're looking at here is, I'm going to go ahead and spoil the surprise. We're looking at some pretty substantial rate increases. And it really does, it's founded in this shift that the district is making towards more proactively reinvesting in its infrastructure and making sure that it stays ahead of replacing that capital infrastructure. It's a well-known fact in the industry that if you wait until something fails, it can be as much as 10 times more expensive to deal with the problem when you have to sign an emergency contracts and you can't plan ahead for dealing with the failed pipeline or a broken pump station and whatnot. So by getting out ahead of this aging infrastructure and dealing with it now, the district is saving ratepayers a lot of money in the long run. Next slide. So the thing the first thing we have to be aware of is how rates are set in California. There's no overseeing regulator that reviews rates. The districts such as Marina Coast simply have to abide by the law, and the law in this case is known as Proposition 218, which establishes that they can't charge more than the cost of providing service, and they have to go through a process of notifying customers before it raises the rates. So as the rate consultant, my job is to make sure that the district complies with both of those things. So they pay me to make sure that all the rates are done fair and equitably to all your customers and that they're not over collecting the rates. And that we go through a notification process and a public hearing process to make sure that the public is aware of the rate increases and have an opportunity to learn more about it. And that's part of that process that we're going through right now. Next slide. So when we do a rate study, there's 3 general steps. First, we look at the revenue requirements. You could look at that as a financial plan, all the money coming in, all the money going out, and understanding how much money we need going forward. Once we understand how much rate revenue we need from the customers, then we do what's called a cost of service analysis, where we look at different types of customers, the size of their meters, how they use water, and we make sure that the different types of customers are being charged the equitable amount, the fair amount based on how they're using the system. And then the rate design is simply the way we shape those rates when you receive your bill, how much of it you're paying through your meter charge, which is fixed, and how much of it you're paying through your usage, and whether you're paying tiered rates and that type of thing. And we'll talk about all 3 of these aspects as I go through the next slides. So I'm going to jump into some of the financial plan findings for the district. Now, the district is unique. Usually a water district will either just have one water utility, or it'll be water and sewer. Sometimes water, sewer, and recycled water. In this case, there's 5 what we call cost centers, because Ford and Marina are inherently different systems. They were built at different times. They weren't always operated by the same district. And so as part of the agreement, when the district started managing both Ford and Marina, the agreement stated that those cost centers would remain separate, and that the monies and the management of those systems would remain separate, that the spending and the costs and the revenues would all be kept separate. So that's what we've done here. So we have Marina sewer, water, Ford water, Ford sewer, and recycled water. Those are the 5 cost centers that we did rate studies around. The costs that are shared, it's a single district, and so it is important to understand that when costs can be allocated directly to a specific cost center, that's what happens. So if there's a project in a specific area, then that cost is paid for that specific area. There are some overhead type costs that are incurred at a higher level that must be, spread out amongst the cost centers equitably. And the district does have a what we call a cost allocation plan, which was part of my study. I updated it to make sure that those costs were being allocated equitably amongst the cost centers. Next slide. Just some general assumptions that went into the financial plan. We assumed that salaries and benefits would increase by 10% next year and 3% thereafter. The 10% is based on a memorandum of understanding that was signed in agreement with the employees. So we know that's going to be a change in the cost, but then we assume there'll be inflationary increases thereafter. PG&E, we know that those rates have been going up double digit every year recently, so we're assuming that will continue that same trend. Source of supply, is driven by both cost inflation and an increase in water demand. And so Ord is growing quite rapidly. And so the cost of water supply is going up with that. And marina is growing quite slowly. And so we assume that the source supply cost of marina is going up slower than Ord, simply because Ord needs to purchase more water. The good news, though, is that when Ord grows more quickly, they also get more customers, and so more people paying those costs. And so really that ends up canceling each other out. And then other costs are all assumed to increase by 3%. Next slide. A very detailed capital improvement plan, which is the term that's used for planning for infrastructure improvements, was conducted by the district. And we went through a number of iterations over the last few months. These numbers were significantly larger, and we went back to the drawing board, and this district staff looked to prioritize the capital spending. And this is the total amount of project spending that's been identified for the next 5 years, the $45 million across the 5 cost centers. So that is the recommended level of capital spending, which is a significant increase over what's been delivered historically. But as I explained earlier, that's just the new approach that the district is implementing to make sure that infrastructure is being taken care of. Next slide. Just to put things in perspective before we dive into the rate increases that are being proposed, I want everyone to understand that water rates are very specific to different utilities. Different utilities face different costs. It depends on where they're located, where they receive their water, how old their infrastructure is, how large their service area is, where the receiving bodies are for their treated wastewater. There's a number of factors that go into the cost of running a utility, and this particular area is cut off from a lot of water sources. You really only have groundwater, and so you have to rely on either desal or recycled water if you want additional water. Other parts of the state have major rivers that are, or canals that are accessible, which is not the case here. So this kind of puts it in perspective when you look at other water utilities in the region, that really Marina and Ord have lower than average rates for this region. The rate increases will increase the rates, obviously, and it will, but I don't think you're going to leapfrog the highest rates in the region by any stretch. Next slide. So jumping into Ord water, I'm not going to go through this entire list, but just to show you that the $20 million in capital spending isn't just a number that was pulled out of the air. These are very specific projects based on very specific needs, and the district engineers have been looking at prioritizing and making sure that this list of projects are projects that need to be done in the next 5 years. Next slide. So this, I'm going to slow down a little bit here because there's a lot going on, and there's I have a graph like this for each cost center, but this is the product of all of the financial planning that went into the study. And I know that people who are joining online can't see this, but I'll try to explain as well as I can verbally. There are 2 graphs. There's the top graph and the bottom graph. The top graph represents revenues compared to expenses. So the background in green represents revenue, and the columns in the foreground represent expenses. So the green, the dark green in the background is miscellaneous revenue, whether that's capacity charge revenue. The light green in the middle is your existing rate revenue that you get from existing rates. And you can see it's increasing over time. This is existing rates. That's because of the growth that I mentioned. So even if you keep charging exactly the same rates, you're going to get more rate revenue because the customer base is growing over time. And in the dark green represents the additional revenue you get from the proposed rate increases. The proposed rate increases are listed at the bottom, and it's just the first 5 that are being proposed. The last 5 are really just for reference. to show that we've thought about 10 years, but we're only adopting rates for the next 5 years. So it's 10% for 3 years and then 6% for 2 years. In the foreground here, the dark blue represents your operating expenses, the hash blue represents the debt service, and the light blue, or the light blue at the top represents capital spending. So you can see there appears to be no capital spending happening at all in the next 3 years. It's not that there's no capital spending that's happening, it's because those projects are gonna be debt financed. If we didn't debt finance those projects, the rates increases here would have to have been spiked a lot more aggressively in order to be able to cover the cash requirements of cash financing those projects. So in order to smooth out the rate increases without needing to spike rates too quickly, we decided to debt finance the immediate capital spending needs and then to start cash financing them starting in 2028. And you can see that spreads the rates out. The middle graph here, the lower graph represents reserves. So the red line represents the lowest possible reserves that that the district could have without being in financial trouble. And you can say, and then the light, so the dashed line at the top is the target reserves. The district has adopted reserve policies for targeted cash levels, and it's going to take a while, but after 10 years, we hope to eventually get there. The green line that sort of goes up over time, that's the projected reserve levels. So you can see we stayed pretty close to minimum reserves for the next few years, and then eventually starting 2027, that line starts moving up, and we start working towards achieving reserve targets. So for Ford Sewer, I won't spend as much time on each one of these slides because I've sort of explained, and hopefully everyone's got a printout. So if you want to spend time to look at these specific projects, go ahead and do that. But you can see here's the list of specific projects that will be delivered in the next 5 years at a cost of $12.7 million. Next slide. And here is the same cash flow graph that I showed. So in this case, for sewer, this is actually the one cost center that is in pretty good shape currently. The rate increases are really just sort of inflationary adjustment, 4% per year, which is just a little bit over, it's a touch over inflation, which tends to be around 3% per year. You can see the reserves are in decent shape. But despite that, the increase in capital spending, I mean, the capital spending is going to be significantly higher than it has been. And so for the first few years, the district or the cost center will be drawing down reserves through 2028, and then it will start recovering after that. But during that time, there's going to be a significant amount of capital spending, and that's going to benefit all the ratepayers in that cost center. Marina is a smaller system. Marina in general is a smaller system, both in terms of numbers of customers, but even more significantly, just the footprint of Marina water, the miles of pipe is significantly smaller. So there's fewer customers, but there's a lot less pipe and a lot less infrastructure. And that's part of the reason, we get a lot of questions about why Marina and Ward have different rates. The number, there's a number of factors that go into it, but by far the number one reason is because Ward water is simply spread out over a much larger area, and so there's more miles of pipe per person. So each person requires more miles of pipe to serve them because of the service area is more spread out, and the cost of running a water utility like this is not the cost of the water itself, it's the cost of delivering the water. So when you have to manage more pipes and more pumps and whatnot per person, then your rates are going to be higher. So you can see that the capital program is noticeably smaller than it is for Ord, partly because it's a smaller system. Next slide. But unfortunately, Marina is probably the cost center that is in the toughest spot right now financially. The rates really at this point, you can see in this first graph that last year, the the cost center was able to cover its expenses, that it was drawing down its reserves, the revenues were less than the expenses. And so you can see the reserves really getting drawn down quite quickly, last year, and so the capital spending, just like Ward, is all going to be debt financed for the next few years, again, to avoid the cash flow requirements of cash financing capital. And then even in 28-29, the capital spending is tempered. It's not until 2030 that the capital spending really picks up pace. And that's because these rate increases have had an opportunity to take hold. You can see these are pretty significant rate increases, 20% for 3 years and 8% for 2 years. And then Marina Sewer is spending about $6 million. Again, a smaller system than Board. Next slide. And in this case, Marina Sewer, not as difficult a situation as Marina Water, but still, we understand that these are pretty significant rate increases. But we looked at it from every angle, and this is really the best way forward that we can identify. So getting no cash funded capital over the next few years. And then you can see the reserves start recovering pretty much right away because of that strategy, and then hold steady after 2028. Next slide. So those are the rate increases as a whole. Now I'm going to shift gears and talk about what the rates themselves are actually going to look like. There are going to be a couple little changes to the rate structure and what people will see on their bill. Next slide. So currently, for water rates, everybody pays a fixed service charge based on the size of their meter, and everybody pays a tiered rate. And a tiered rate means that you get 10 HCF of water at one rate, at a lower rate, and then everything after 10 HCF is more expensive. 1 HCF stands for cubic feet, and it's about 750 gallons of water. So basically, for the first 7,500 gallons, you receive your water at a relatively cheaper rate, and then and this is per month, after 7,500 gallons in that month, you pay a higher rate. What's being proposed is that tiered system only apply to residential, and the reason is because you have some non-residential customers, schools or large institutions, who burn through 7,500 gallons in one day. I mean, they're these massive, connections. They need a lot of water. And so they're basically only getting a little bit of tier 1 water rates, the benefit of the tier 1 rates for just a little bit of water, and then they're paying tier 2 rates effectively for the rest of their water. And just as an industry standard, that's not really how things are done. You typically want to recognize that some people have larger water needs, and so the solution is that we're going to charge those non-residential customers or commercial and multifamily, they'll just be charged a uniform rate. So they're not going to get the cheap rate, but they're also not going to pay the higher tier 2 rate. It's going to be a rate that's sort of in between, and they'll pay that for all the water. And graphically, this is what it looks like, right? So tier 1 is a cheaper source of water, or cheaper water, and tier 2 is more expensive water. The way to justify the difference between tier 1 and tier 2 is that tier 2 rates pay for the conservation program, with the idea being that folks who are using tier 2 water are the ones who are driving the need for the conservation program, and so the cost of that program is recovered through tier 2 rates. And then for the uniform rate, they simply pay a single rate, and the conservation costs are spread through all those costs. And so here is what the rates will look like and how they'll change. So here are the current rates. Here are the proposed rates. And this is how they're going to change. This year represents how much revenue we're recovering through fixed versus variable. In this case, it's really not changing much. It's about 50-50, which is where the district would like to see it. You'll see for some of the other cost centers, there's going to be a pretty significant change from how things are currently to what's being proposed. But for Ord Water, it's currently about 50-50, which is how the district would like it to be. Next slide. So those previous numbers are kind of hard to understand because it's a rate schedule and a lot of you folks are probably just wondering, well, what's my bill going to look like? So this is a graph or a table that's more helpful in that regard because it helps you try to identify maybe an example up here that represents you the most and how your bill might be changing. So this is showing different types of customers, different profiles and how their bill might change. So a single family with low water use currently, using 3 HCF per month, is currently paying $63 per month. And their new rate will be $72, which is a $9 increase, $9.13. And you can see the numbers for median use, and average use, and different types of multifamily examples with 50 site meters and non-residential. The non-residential is a tough one because there's so many different types of non-residential customers. It spans a really wide variety with different meter sizes and different water needs. But generally, what you're seeing is that there are customers who are actually going to see a decrease in their bill. And that's predominantly the customers who have been in tier 2 water because they were large water users. And so they've been effectively paying tier 2 rates. So now into the uniform rate, they're actually going to see some benefit from that. And so in year 1, they might actually see a decrease in their bill. Next slide. I think you can this we'll go back from there. So here are the marina water rates. And you can see this is a bit different in terms of the fixed. Currently, marina water recovers about 37% of their water, of their revenue through the fixed. And so that's bumping up to be the same as Oregon water because the district's really trying to get to a point where about half of its revenue is fixed. That helps the district be more financially stable so that droughts and whatnot don't have such a big impact on their revenue. You can see the changes to the bills, the current rates to the proposed rates. And this is all with the 20% increase. Next slide. And here's the bill impact. So in this case, for marina water, the low single family, low water user currently pays about $40 per month. And the proposed bill for year 1 will be just over $55. So that's an increase of about $15.59. On the sewer side, there's go to the next slide, cost of service and rate design. The current rates for sewer are 100% fixed. So the way that sewer is charged is that when a sewer account joins the system, if they're residential, then they're simply charged based on the number of dwelling units they have. So a single family has 1 residential unit, multifamily, depending on how many residential units they have, how many dwelling units they have, they're assigned 1 unit per dwelling unit. And then for commercial, they're assigned an EDU, an equivalent dwelling unit, based on how much sewage the district estimates that account will produce, based on the type of activity that the non-residential account comprises of. What's being proposed is that, the district doesn't have a perfect sense of what those customers are going to do in the future in terms of how much sewage they're actually going to produce. So it's proposing to introduce a variable rate, so a flow-based rate, in addition to the EDU rate. So there's going to be 50% of the bill will be the current system where you're charged per dwelling unit or EDU. And the other half of the bill is going to be based on the actual amount of sewage that the district estimates is being produced. Sewage can't be metered. And so the way that the district estimates sewage is by looking at wintertime water usage for residential. So we're looking at January, February, March. There's minimal outdoor water usage during that time. And so the district looks at that water usage to estimate how much sewage is being produced by residential accounts. And then non-residential, they simply look at the water usage because non-residential accounts use all their water indoors. Their outdoor water should be metered separately on an irrigation meter. Next slide. So I just covered this, I guess, on the next slide. So currently, as we mentioned, 100% of the revenue is fixed based on the EDU system, and now it's going to be 50-50, just like the water utilities recover 50% of their revenue through fixed. And so you can see that the bill is split. Currently, it's $38 per board, $38 per EDU. The year one will be $20.55 per EDU, and then $4 per HCF, again, based on wintertime water usage for residential. And you can see the bill impacts here. In this case, what you'll notice is that customers who use less water are actually going to see a benefit from this, because the fixed system assumed that they were using a certain amount of water. If you're a below average water user, then moving to a system where the district actually looks at that and understands, oh, this is a lower water user, there's going to be a benefit to those customers. So for the first year, you're actually going to see a reduction in some customers who are low water users, and vice versa. Because customers who use a disproportionately a large amount of water are going to see that on their bill as well. Next slide. Marina sewer, same change, from percentage 50/50, going from about $18 to $9.45 with EDUs and $1.85 for ATF. And same dynamics for the bill impacts. Low water users will see a benefit from this change, and high water users will see their bills go up to reflect the fact that they are producing more sewage. Maybe we'll skip this slide. I haven't had an opportunity to review this one. Unless Mary wants to cover it. Okay, so private fire meter charge. This is just a charge that customers who have a direct connection to the water system for their fire protection, that rate's just going to go up by the CPI, which is inflation, 2.3%. Next slide. And then the water shortage surcharge. So a water shortage surcharge is a surcharge that's implemented during times of drought. And the reason that you do it is because water districts experience financial impacts from droughts. There's three major things that would happen in this case for Marina coasts. They see a decrease in rate revenue because people are using less water. They see a decrease in some costs, such as electricity, because they're pumping less water. And then they see an increase in some costs. In this case, they see an increase in the conservation program. And so we model what those changes are based on different levels of drought to understand how much financially they're going to be impacted. And we calculated a surcharge that would be appropriate to add to the rates during times of pretty significant drought, just to make sure that the district doesn't have any revenue shortfalls. Next slide. So the approach here is to apply a surcharge during different stages to reduce capital spending to some degree, because your focus changes when there's a significant drought. The district is going to be refocusing on water supply and less on capital spending. And then there will be a modest amount of reserves that will be drawn down during that time. So it's a three-pronged approach to deal with droughts. Next slide. So it's kind of a complicated graph, but if you ignore the light blue box and the empty box, you can see this is what would happen if the district were to do nothing at all during drought. So you can see this is normal times where revenues and expenses offset each other. And during a stage drought, 5 drought, the revenues would be at this line, would be at $4 million, and expenses would be at $5.5 million. So you can see that there's a really big revenue shortfall, financial problem in a stage 5 drought. And so you can see the impacts of the strategy I mentioned. The light blue represents the extra revenue that you'll get from the surcharge, so it increases your revenues a bit. And then the empty box represents the decrease in capital spending to bring expenses down. And then you can see the delta, the difference between the blue and the brown becomes a lot smaller. And so that's the use of reserves. And so we're using 3 different elements there to address the financial shortfall. Next slide. What we didn't show is what the surcharges would be. So the surcharges would be, there's 5 different types of, I'm sorry, go back one slide. A stage 1 drought is about a 10% reduction in water. Stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5 are basically, in round numbers, are about 20, 30, 40, 50% reductions in water. So stage 5 drought is when people are using 50% less water than they normally do. The surcharges would be no surcharge during normal times, no surcharge during stage 1, because stage 1 happens pretty frequently. It'd be a 10% surcharge in stage 2, 20%, 30%, 40%. So up to 40% surcharge on stage 5. And that only applies to the consumption rate. So the usage part of the bill. It doesn't apply to the fixed charge. It only applies to the usage portion of the bill. And last slide. So what we'll do following this outreach meeting and getting feedback from the public and taking your questions is that we will eventually send out a 218 notice, which is required by law to let ratepayers know the proposed rates and giving them more information based on that notice, giving them resources and people to contact, websites that they can go to look at the full report. And then we're going to hold a public hearing on June 17th after allowing folks to protest if they so wish, and to come to the public hearing and voice their concerns. And if a 50% protest hasn't been submitted by ratepayers, then the board is then authorized to move forward with considering the rates and voting on it based on whether they want to approve the proposed rates. And I believe the next slide is yours.
Yeah, but I think you should just stay for questions. This is just explaining the question.
I'll let you have a seat.
Yeah. This is, here we are, we're connected. So the questions are the same. If you're online, you can raise your hand with the little raise hand tool and we'll recognize you and unmute you and give you a chance to talk. If you're here, you can just raise your hand, we'll see you. And if you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by *9, take your hand down with *9 again, and you can mute and unmute yourself with *6. So let's see, is there anybody in the room that has a question or a comment or some input that you'd like to offer? Okay, yes.
Sure. I think the presentation was done very well. I believe the presentation is done very well. I look forward to going through in more detail the CIP, but I think you're on the right course and I commend the board for going along this path.
All right, thank you. Tio, is there anyone online?
No.
No one's raising their hands. Any, I guess, phone, you'll see that too in the same place. We'll give people a moment to think about it. And if there's none, then we'll call it a day or an evening. Any comments from the board?
Any comments from the board? Director Moore?
So just
Let me give you the mic.
I'd just like to say thank you to those of you in public and those of you online who've taken the time to listen into this. I've heard this crazy rumor that waterboard meetings are like watching paint peel. I don't subscribe to that. Fascinating organization. We very much appreciate the fact that you've come out to listen to our rate presentation. So thank you, and pass it on to our board chair.
Director.
Thank you, President. With regard to Director Moore's comments, I again appreciate the members of the public and ratepayers who attended this meeting. And I'm the new director on the board. I was elected a year ago. And I will say that I've been real fascinated by the staff and how hard they work, engineers. and also in working with my fellow directors. Just to give a brief background of myself, I came and my wife and I moved here to Marina approximately 9 years ago. And prior to that, I used to work for the Santa Clara Valley Water District. I don't know if anyone of you are familiar with that. So again, it's not really comparing apples and apples because Santa Clara Valley is, for those of you who are familiar, is huge. But with regard to the professionalism of the staff, again, I really appreciate the work that goes on, and I really appreciate the opportunity and the privilege to represent the public on this board. It's really important, and I think it says a lot that you don't have to worry about your water. I mean, that's one of the things that people don't really think about. You know, we can't live without water, but yet we seem to take it for granted. And once you see what it takes to get the water to your house or to your business, it's very complex. And I think it's a real, you have to have a real appreciation of what goes on to not have to worry about it when you wake up in the morning, you turn on the faucet and the water comes. So again, it's been a real privilege to serve on the board, and thank you all for attending.
Director Shiner, Vice President.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions I want to clarify on the pages, if you don't mind. I think they're questions more for Mr. Hildebrand. With respect to presentation, they're pretty small questions. I think you've done a great job of collecting a wide, complicated net of numbers and trying to streamline them for us. But if you could look at pages 37, 39, you're introducing the uniform rate. And I think the uniform rate, right now this board is having a current uniform rate. So could you let me know how is this current uniform rate expressed? I'm not familiar.
Sure.
I'm looking for 37 and 39. 37 is ordered and 39 is,
Yeah, so go to the presentation.
yeah. I think there's 37.
Pretty much, because I said that they have tiered rates currently, and I put up here that the current rates are uniform. There should be an asterisk, a little footnote on that number. I apologize for it going missing, but that's the effective rate that I calculated that's being paid by that customer class currently. So when I take all of the water that's being purchased by that group of customers, and all the dollars that they're spending and divided by the number of gallons that they're receiving, that's the effective rate that they're currently paying. So you can see that their effective rate is actually going to drop from 770 down to 730.
Okay, thank you. And the same kind of thing you did then for Marina.
Correct.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. On 52, the one that we were mitigating for the route, and hopefully we will have one for a while.
Right.
But I think with the labor, just want to make sure it says Marina water, and we're all really used to using Marina water for just one cost center. So, but this would be for everyone.
This applies to both. Yeah, this is really just, well, yeah, I guess there are dollars there, but conceptually you can apply it to both Marina and Ord. Same concept applies, and the same percentages apply to what worked out nicely is that these surcharges, I ran the exercises totally independently from one, and they both came out to, one was 9.8%, the other was 10.1%. They were both very close to 10. And so for simplicity, and because at the end of the day, they're very similar results, I kept the percentages the same. The other thing that's nice about making it a percentage is that you don't have to update. It's not a bunch of new numbers. It's just percentages applied to the then current rates. So that policy can remain active for the next 5 or 6 years until you decide to relook at the numbers and make sure that they're still applicable.
And this process of declaring the stages, it's not something that just one person gets to do.
That's your job.
Yeah, the board evaluates.
That's right.
It's based on some.
I mean, you'll be in an environment where the state will be declaring a statewide stage, and they'll be giving guidance. I believe, I'm not intimately familiar with that process, but there is a pretty formal process that happens at the state level, and an understanding of what's happening in the region. But ultimately, it is the board's prerogative to declare what stage they declare their district to be in. And that would trigger the surcharges.
Thank you. And I hope I understand we don't take that lightly, that
Right.
responsibility and that action that might hopefully never take. Thank you for clarifying, and thanks everyone for.
Yes.
Director Cortez.
Good evening, everyone. Just want to echo my fellow directors, just to thank the public, thank the staff, thank the consultants for an excellent presentation. Very clear, both for those in the room and outside. And we look forward to additional comments on June 17 or before.
So as the board president, I want to thank also the public for coming, our staff and our consultants. This was a monumental effort. Obviously, we've had multiple meetings, multiple inputs, tremendous education from our consultant, Mark Hildebrand, who has educated all of us as to the process that we've gone through and coming up with the report today and the recommendations that this board is now bringing forward to you for your consideration. The staff is going to remain, our staff, they're all around the room. Perhaps our staff should stand up, so if you have questions, I know it's embarrassing. But our staff, as board directors, very, very proud of them, and they are here to answer your questions. We're also going to have Mark Hildebrand, our consultant, available to you to ask and to answer questions for the next few minutes, however long your questions go on. If somebody in the attendees wants to raise their hand now before we adjourn, please do so, because that's going to be difficult once we adjourn to see if you're raising your hands. I'm not seeing anything with the attendees. So with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting and ask all of you, please introduce yourself now that we're adjourned. Introduce yourself to us, to the staff, and get your questions answered. Thank you again for coming, and we'll see you for the 17th, again, with further clarification if needed. You're done.